Welcome back everybody to linuxacademy.com. My name is Terry, and in today's course we continue our preparation for the Linux Foundation Certified System Administration exam. We're going to continue our discussion about HTTP services, and we're going to talk about how to install and configure the Squid proxy server, and then how to configure an HTTP client to automatically use that proxy server. So let's start with the installation and configuration of our Squid proxy server. Now, if you're using a CentOS based system, which is what we're going to be doing here, we're going to install Squid and SquidGuard, and we'll see that in a moment. If you happen to be using a Debian or Ubuntu system, you'll use apt-get, and you'll also install Squid and SquidGuard, but SquidGuard will be delineated with a Squid-guard rather than the SquidGuard that we'll type in as part of the yum installation. So again, we're going to go ahead and configure our server. Let's do a sudo su so that we're root. And let's do a yum install on the Squid proxy server as well as the SquidGuard, and that's with a capital G, SquidGuard, for installing the proxy list that will enable us to protect our system. So let's go ahead and do the install. Again, if you're running an Ubuntu system, right here where you see SquidGuard, you'll actually use a lowercase g and a dash between the Squid and SquidGuard. Otherwise, everything that you'll see in this video is exactly the same, or we would break it out like we've done in the past between the Debian and RPM-based distributions when it differs significantly. So these two applications work in tandem to control how we provide web browser access. It uses what are called access control schemes. So there are ACL elements, which are directive lines that begin with the word ACL and represent types of tests that are run against requests that are made from a client. And then there are access list rules, which consists of either a deny or an explicit allow, followed by a number of elements from an ACL that can indicate what action or what limitation has been enforced for a given request from a client. You'll have to keep in mind that they're checked in order from top to bottom and terminate as soon as one of the rules is a match. So the one that's the most likely to be a match should be higher up in the list. Least likely matches should be less and less, or more and more specific, so that they're not reached before the general rule that it's intended for. Once we install the Squid configuration, we'll go ahead and make a couple of changes. The main configuration file for Squid is quite a bit longer and has quite a bit more stuff in it that we need, especially for an initial video on how to install and configure it for basic ACLs. So what we're going to go ahead and do is we're going to remove a bunch of the commentary, but let's take a look at it first. If we go to the etc squid directory, we'll see we have a number of things in here, but what we're interested in is the squid.conf file. So if we edit the squid.conf file, we'll see there's a whole bunch of stuff in here, including a whole bunch of commentary. So what we're going to go ahead and do is at the start of each of the sections is we could either write a sed routine or we can just write a grep routine that'll pipe out those results to a file. So let's take a look at what that might look like. This is a more advanced use of grep, and this isn't intended to be a grep tutorial. So that all we're going to do is we're telling grep to grep from this particular file, and I want you to remove the following. Let's remove anything that indicates that it is a comment, or anything that indicates that it is a prompt during the beginning of any line from the etc squid.conf file. And we're going to go ahead and create a new file called etc squid.edit. And then we'll just take a look at what that looks like. Once we've done that, we can do a wc-l on the squid configuration file and see how many lines it has. And then we'll also do a wc-l on the squid.edit and see how many that has. So let's move our squid configuration file to a backup. We'll call it squid.original.backup. And then let's make a copy of our squid.edit to squid.configuration so that we can use it. And then we'll edit the squid configuration file itself. So a lot of the extraneous stuff we've removed, and we can hone right in on the things that we want to talk about. So there are two things that we want to talk about. So the connections are going to come to this Squid server over port 3128. That's the default port that Squid will listen for proxy connections. And all that this proxy is doing is it's going to actually look like, from the web perspective, the originating IP address for any request is actually going to be this server rather than the client browser IP. So this is similar to what if you use incognito mode, or if you use an anonymizer. This is effectively what Squid is doing. It's anonymizing the client connection IP because everything appears to be coming from the proxy server itself. So I could have 500 users on 500 browsers with 500 different client IPs that are using this particular proxy server, and all of those connections and all of those requests coming from to and from the web would look like they're coming from this one particular server, because it's acting as a proxy. It's inserting itself between web transactions and the client asking for them. So there are two things that we have to configure. We have to make sure that we have a line that says ACL localhost source 127.0.0.1, and then we're also looking for localhost source and then a net on localnet. So they've got three different example local networks that you might be using. We're going to take the closest one, and we happen to be using an internal network of 1 dot, and it does happen to be a 24, which means it's a full class C. So I'm saying that if you get a connection from localhost or any network IP on 192.168.1.0, that I want you to access. HTTP access is allowed for manager and localhost, and allowed for local net and localhost. Everything else is denied. The port is set here, the core dump directory is set there, and then we can set some information about refresh patterns for certain types of connections. Safe ports are simply the ports that are defined within the proxy as being redirectable, those ports that we know that are safe to redirect, which is SSL, port 80, FTP, Gopher. There's some unregistered ports that are typical for different applications that are under 65,535, and then there are a few others. And you can add your own ports. So if you were proxying a game server, for example, you could do that from here. So once we know that we've got a localhost source and a localhost network that has the appropriate HTTP access allows, we're leaving it on the default port 3128. However, we could change that if we wanted to. We're going to then exit, and then we'll save our file, and then we're going to restart the service. Now, again, because we're using a sysvinit system, we use the check config and the squid on for turning on the service after reboot. And then we'll use the service squid start for starting the squid service. And if we were using systemd, it would be systemctl enable squid and then system control start squid. So that covers the different servers and system types that you may be using for Squid. In our next video, we're going to set up a client to use the proxy server itself, and then once we connecting, how they're browsing, and what happens when we turn off that configuration. But for installing and configuring our Squid proxy server, that's all there is to it. My name is Terry for Linux Academy.